record button. So welcome everybody again on a Sunday afternoon for our regular meeting with Kingdom Builders and Israeli global leaders with the Tam Drori. We've got lots of apologies today for different reasons, people on family meetings, etc. But a number of them will be viewing the recording, and it's great to see our old friend, Professor Dan Glai, who's coming at breakfast time in Israel, so 7:30 in the morning in Israel. Atan, would you like to welcome Dan? Dan, I've made you a co-host. If you want to show your PowerPoint yourself, or I can do it for you, one or the other. All good.
Okay.
Okay. Over to you, Atan.
Okay. Thank you, John. Thank you. Thank you for the partnership, and thank you for going all the way on this marathon war of attrition that we're having since 7th of October. And on the road together, as usual, we are speaking to ambassadors of goodwill, ladies and gentlemen who are really showing interest on a weekly basis, and it's not obvious to have you all here, and of course those who later on will watch the link and know exactly the effort that we are all putting here to develop awareness, and mainly I think, and that's something that John and myself emphasize, is being apolitical. We have speakers from all corners of the political arena in Israel. We have army representatives, hostages families representatives. And I think that by asking our old friend, someone who goes with us over a decade, hosting us at his university, the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, and really showing major involvement in general with Australia, not only with us as a team and allies. I, in fact, would like to let you, John, introduce Danny. But before that, I would like to say that I wanted Danny, in a way, to later on elaborate, before asking questions by all of us, to elaborate on something interesting that the former Consul General of Israel in Boston, and today the executive director of I forgot the name of his organization, but he's Nadav Tamir, who presented us one weekend, is the J Street Israel's executive director, and also heading foreign affairs for the Peres Center, where he said, we are now, it will soon become all too apparent that the Make America Great by Trump agenda will only serve to make Israel weak forever. And I would like you, Danny, later on, to somehow give your opinion about it, because we are talking economy, we're talking the future of the state of Israel, and not only that, we're talking about the future of our next generation of innovators, of amazing startup nation representatives. So, John, please introduce Danny, and I said my word for today at this stage.
Okay, wonderful. Thanks, Atan. And welcome, Professor Dan Glai, we have a regular Sunday afternoon meeting for about an hour with some Q&A perhaps we'll fit in, and then we have a half an hour prayer for Israel every Sunday afternoon with those who want to stay on from 5:30 till 6 o'clock and discuss our guest and pray for our guest and pray for what's happening in Israel.
Are you recording, John?
Yes, I am recording. All is there.
Perfect.
So I think Atan introduced me to Professor Dan probably in one of our first trips to Israel, and when Professor Dan was at Hebrew University at heading up part of the business school. And we actually took a group of small business people to study at Hebrew University. And we had a number of the normal business lecturers come in, and we studied all sorts of interesting aspects. And Dan was one of those lecturers at the time who was introducing us to both what he was doing at that time, which I'm sure he'll share a bit, and also that how one of the fascinating things that he then went on to do was how to ascertain whether a startup business is going to be successful or not. In fact, he has written a few books. One of them's very, very thick. I've still got here, Dan, that you know, how to ascertain whether a startup is going to be successful, which I've used and referred to with a number of different young business people over the time period to help them on their journey. But always, Dan has been involved with economics. He's been to Australia a number of times, and we've had him as guest speakers at our Kingdom Economic Summit in previous years, and he would be a guest lecturer at Melbourne University on business and economics, and he came out for a number of years until perhaps COVID stopped that. I'm not quite sure, Dan. I think COVID stopped a lot of those things. So it's with great pleasure that I welcome you to our little Sunday afternoon group and to share what has happened with the Israeli economy over the last year and where it currently is, and that may lead to a Q&A on to where it might go in the future, particularly after last week's election result. So over to you, Dan. Where have you gone?
Thank you very much. Let me see that I can get my presentation on. Just a minute. It's I don't know why I don't see it. Yeah, I see it here.
You send it to me by email so you can have it there.
No, I have
got
it.
it. Yeah, you should have it. Yeah. Here we go.
Here we go. Yeah.
Yep,
thank you very much, John. And yes, we met more than 10 years ago. Since then, I've been to Australia many times. I think cumulatively about a year and a half, teaching at the University of Melbourne as an MBS. And I'm planning to be in Australia again on December 2nd. Going first to Taiwan to teach, and then I have a seminar in Sydney, but I'll be in Melbourne. Also having some academic meetings as well as business meetings in Melbourne. And I still teach at the Hebrew University as a professor emeritus, teaching about innovations, running a course, a seminar on biodesign, where students are inventing new medical instruments. It's a cooperation between the business school, medical school, and School of Engineering. And another course that I'm co-running is innovation, innovations in fintech, also training students to innovate, to think about new businesses in the fintech space. So actively engaged in teaching and also on board of some startup companies and advising them on the strategy, trying to promote also cooperation between Israeli companies and Australian companies. And I think that we have one success that we hope will be a success story. So in the future, we can give it as an example. Okay, so I was asked to talk about the state of the Israeli economy, to stay away from politics. It's an impossibility So let me start by sort of an overview of where we stand now in November 24. But we must start there is a breaking point in the successful history of Israel as far as the economy is concerned in January 2023. So I'll sort of try to give you some information what happened before, but emphasize what happened since. So until 2023, the Israeli economy was really flourishing, doing extremely well, almost constantly expanding by 3 to 5% per annum, the growth rate, much higher than the OECD countries. The major accelerator was the high-tech industry, no doubt about it. We had more than 1,000 new startups per year for a country that is only 10 million people. So you have to take it into account. It's the highest rate in the world as far as the startup, and therefore we had the name of the startup nation. Also, only to give you sort of one number, is the GDP per capita was $53,000 per annum. It was among the 10 best in the world as far as GDP is concerned. And it's not necessarily including mining, oil, etc., but most of it was due to startups. And I'll show you some data later on, what happened before and after in the startup sphere. What happened in January 23, out of the blue, really out of the blue, in my view, completely unnecessary, the Minister of Justice announced, surprising also his colleagues and people from his party, he announced a series of about 200 new laws and reforms to the judicial system, all in one way to have better control and strengthen the control of the government. Now, we don't have constitution. Very important to understand. And we don't have constitution because of religion, sort of reasons. The religion parties, when Israel was established in 1948, were against constitution because they said, we have constitution, the Bible. I think it was a grave mistake because we have diverse population, and you need, especially in such sort of background, you need a constitution to establish some of the basic rules to manage the country. But we don't have, and the changes the Minister of Justice proposed were really, as I said, in one direction to eliminate, to some extent, the independence of the judicial system, which was so important. And again, it was completely unjustified. Not that you cannot reform and change and improve things every so often when you find all kinds of weaknesses and problems. But this was a revolution in a sense, and the intention was very clear to eliminate the independence of the judicial system. And since the government also controls the Knesset, we don't have separation like you have in many countries between the three forces. Okay? So many people saw it as a very dangerous step and went to the streets starting to demonstrate. So since January 23, every Saturday, you have hundreds of thousands of people demonstrating in the streets. Many of them are from the startup nation, from the startup companies, because they saw a major threat. You see, when you talk about startups, technological startups, it's very easy to move them from place to place. They need to know that they are safe, that they have very good protection from any government that may try to eliminate some of the free trade and impose maybe all kinds of taxes and restrictions. And since it's not a factory that must be in a place, startups, technological startups, can be moved from place to place easily. And the fear was that many of the new startups are not going to establish their headquarters in Israel, but they will move them many to the United States. Because you need this stability and eliminate uncertainty. And once you start those reforms, the fear was that you increase the uncertainty about economic freedom, about the legal system. And so people went to the streets and did it consistently week after week. And the whole country got into turmoil and very decisive political also war between those supporting the judicial system and those opposing it. Okay, and there was a worry about the democratic principles of Israel, because some of the people supporting the judicial system didn't care much about democracy, and they had other motives in order to impose the government on the judicial system. And I don't want to get into politics, so I'm trying very hard to stay away from it. So what happened, and it coincided also with some global trends, to be fair and honest, a decline in investments in startup companies. So we saw the same trend unrelated to the judicial fights in Israel. We had the same trend in Europe, in the United States, from 2023, decline in investments in technological companies. But in Israel, it was very decisive, very sharp, and continuing until today with some slight possible changes in trend for the last quarter. And I'll show you the data. Okay, at the same time, more or less, and it's related to the judicial changes, was a big fight that is, again, a decisive fight in among the Israeli people. It's about whether ultra-Orthodox should serve in the army or not. And again, I'll give you two sort of sentences as a background. When Israel was established in 1948, the ultra-Orthodox, which were really a minority, they were less than 5%, 4% of the population, they asked Ben-Gurion to continue the tradition from Europe that those wise people, wise students, very wise, very special, that are studying in yeshiva, that are studying in special schools, will be released from the army, because the law in Israel from 48 was, first of all, everybody is equal by law. Second, that everybody has to serve in the army. It was compulsory service, initially for 2.5 years, then it went to 3 years. Now it's 2 years and 3/4. But everybody has to be recruited, has to come to the army, and some may be released, some not. So but it became sort of traditional to release those that are studying 24/7 in yeshiva. But what happened since is that, first of all, they became more than 10% of the population. They have 15 members in the Knesset out of 120. It means they are about 15% now and growing very fast. And they're expected in 20 years to be something like 30% of the population. Number two, everybody became genius. Among the ultra-Orthodox, there are about each year, you have tens of thousands of them. But now everybody became genius, so nobody has to go for military service. Now, it was an excuse. It was really lying, cheating, because the idea was that special part of them, really the most talented, will go and continue to study, to be rabbis and to be, to follow the studies, the deep studies, fine. But the idea was that those that are not continuing to study, and about 50% really are not continuing to study, and the number quite probably is 70% of them. But now the truth came out during 2023 that the rabbis refuse anybody from the ultra-Orthodox community to go to the army because they're afraid that they will become non-Orthodox. So the army promised to have special unit, to have enough females in those units, to have ultra-kosher food so they can maintain their way of life. But still, the leaders are opposing any recruitment. So that's during 2023. Then came October 7th, that we'll talk about in a minute, where we lost quite a few thousand people that were killed. About 15,000 were injured from the army in military operations. And now the army is serving, some people are serving for 200, 250 days a year. And there's a huge shortage of people. And still, the leaders of the ultra-Orthodox are opposing the recruitment, at least of the army initially said 3,000, 5,000 per year, which is a very small minority. But for ideological reasons, not learning, not studying, everybody knows that it's not anymore the issue of studying in the yeshiva. But they are opposed, and that's one of the major reasons for sort of a split in the society from those that are serving in the army. Many of them are exposing their lives during the war that is going on in Gaza and in Lebanon. And then there is about 15% of the population that is excluded, and it's not by law, it's against the law. So actually the Supreme Court is intervening each time and trying to impose on the government to make new laws that may exclude some from going, those that are studying, but the rest should be recruited. So part of the judicial reform is also around this issue. And it makes the solution much more complicated. Okay. And one sentence, political sentence, the ultra-Orthodox are important part of the coalition of Bibi, Netanyahu. And since he's fighting for his political survival, he can't afford to lose them. And they threaten all the time to quit the government if they are not being acquitted from the military service. So Bibi knows that the army needs them. He knows that it's against the law, the basic law, that everybody is equal. but still since he's fighting for his political survival, he's giving up and actually, in simple words, being blackmailed. Okay, so the internal chaos, where some serving the army for 200 days a year were calling for not to serve. It was before the war. There were calls not to serve on reserve duty as long as the ultra-Orthodox are not being recruited. So the internal chaos reflected maybe potential weakness of Israel, and that's what led the Hamas to attack on October 7th, 2023. Sorry, there's a mistake here, 2023. That killed the same day, more than about 1,400 people were killed. Children, women, men, most of them were non-military people, but also about 400 or 500 soldiers were killed. Also, I think that another reason for the attack, but the timing was due to the chaos, the internal chaos. But one of the other reasons for the attack was that Abraham Accord and the fear of many of the sort of the Shiites, Iran and Hamas and Hezbollah, that Israel will have a relationship with Saudi Arabia. It was very, very close to reach this point where there is an agreement. And that was very much against the interest of Iran, Hamas, Hezbollah. And part of the attack was to prevent it from being realized. And in this respect, they were successful. Still, we are not close as we were to reaching such an agreement with Saudi Arabia. Everything is connected. It's interconnected in the Middle East, very complicated. Okay, the attack on October 7th, 2023 led immediately to recruiting 300,000 to 400,000 people on the reserve duty, reservists, affecting immediately production, research and development. And the effect is much more than 300,000 or 400,000 people that are being recruited to the army for military service, because you have also wives that are working, but now they can't work full time because their husbands are not at home. And by the way, among the 300,000 to 400,000, there were quite many females in combat units, actively in Gaza, in Lebanon. It's quite amazing what some of them did, some of the stories that you can see on television, which are quite amazing. But it's a major disruption for the economy when you have only 10 million people. And since many of those that were recruited are also working in high-tech companies, at universities, you know, in our class, sometimes we were missing 30, 40% of the students were not around for many, many weeks. Some of them had to skip a year. I mean, they couldn't finish a year. They lost a year since they served for such a long time on reserve duty. So that's all in order to understand some of the complexities and difficulties of the Israeli economy since January 23, enhanced by the event since October 7th, 23. Now, on top of it, in addition, due to the missile attacks from Gaza Strip and from Lebanon, and you have to understand, in Gaza Strip, they had about 50,000 missiles, 40 to 50,000 missiles. In Lebanon, it's estimated that they had 200,000 missiles. I'm sure that Australia doesn't have even a small percentage of what Lebanon had. And Lebanon is a country of less than 5 million people. And Lebanon is even smaller, is more or less the same in size as far as the area of the country. And having 200,000 missiles, some of them very accurate, long range. When you think about it, I mean, the people is not aware to the threats to which Israel was and is exposed. Every day, we have from Lebanon still about 100, sometimes 200 missiles, drones, different ways of attacking the different cities, villages. So actually what happened, again, to make long story short, that about 80,000 people were evacuated from their houses near Gaza Strip. Many were destroyed, many places were partially destroyed during the attack of October 7th in Gaza Strip. But in the border of Lebanon, also about 80,000, including one city, Kiryat Shmone, 20,000, 25,000 people had to leave their homes and to find places in hotels. Now, all the hotels became empty because we stopped having tourists. Many foreign carriers stopped flying to Israel because of the missile attack and being worried what will happen to the airplanes. And the insurance companies actually also didn't allow many of the carriers to continue to fly to Israel and the Middle East in general. So as a result, the tourist industry is dead since October 7th. Hotels are empty, so actually hotels were filled by those evacuees from the northern and southern part of Israel. For a year, people stayed in hotels. You can imagine what happens when you have a family with 3, 4 kids staying in a hotel room for such a long time. Even if they have swimming pool, it's not, the conditions are pretty bad. And still, some people are coming back, but most of them are still staying away. So it has an effect on the economy because many factories were closed. Eitan can tell you quite a lot about, there's a accelerator in Kiryat Shmone for food tech with maybe 20, 25 startups. Some of them are quite amazing. They had to quit the place. They couldn't continue. So all the labs, all the people had to leave, to relocate. For some, it was too expensive. They don't have enough financial resources. So they close the doors for at least for a while until they can start again. Also, many of those places, especially around Gaza Strip, but also in the north, were agricultural settlements. So they couldn't reach the fields. No, people couldn't work because it was under a missile attack. So also, not only the tourist industry was dead, but the agriculture industry was semi-dead. And on top of it, all the foreign workers quitted, left Israel immediately after the attack. By the way, about 30 to 40 agricultural workers, especially from Thailand, were killed. Some are still in Gaza Strip, part of the kidnap. So most of the workers left, and as a result, also the agricultural industry is badly hurt. The acute shortage of manpower in the construction business, that was also based on foreign workers and also workers from Gaza Strip, also was hit in a very serious way because we depended on this manpower. Okay, also in the high-tech industry, about 40% of the people are on and off reserve duty. You serve sometimes for a month, 2 months. You can have maybe 1 month at home, you can go to work, but in many places in high tech, you need the continuity. So it's not an easy, they're trying to overcome it. And relatively speaking, the established companies are being able to bridge this issue of many people on reserve duty. In one company that Eitan knows very well, there are 3 co-founders. One of them, the female, all 3 are females. One of them was on a special in a special unit, and I think that 3/4 of the time she was away on active reserve duty.
She spoke to our group, Danny.
Sorry, yeah?
Yeah, she spoke to our group. We are talking about the lady that is an officer in the Air Force and very much involved with Iron Dome, if you remember. At the early stage of the war, John, you remember, yeah? When she was in Melbourne.
Yes, she was in Melbourne. Yes, we spoke with her. Yeah.
Yeah. So in many industries, the disruption is substantial. In a few, it's less so, but what is amazing that the economy is still going forward. And I'll show you some evidence, but briefly. So here you see the GDP of Israel growing steadily. It will also give you an answer to the question you asked, Eitan, about Trump. So if you remember that Trump was the president starting from January 17 to 2020. So you can see that the Israeli economy was expanding. 2020, to remind you, was a lockdown of the COVID starting from March 2020. So you see that even with the lockdown and the COVID, the Israeli economy still was growing, not at the same rate as before, but it compensated in 21. So you see the big jump in 21 when the lockdowns were sort of off, not in Australia, but in Israel. And the economy was still expanding in 2022. And due to the judicial changes, reforms, and the war, in October at the end of the year, the GDP declined for the first time in many, many years. If you have any question.
Yeah, Danny, I would like to ask you, as someone who's spending the time since 7th October, going in and out. I just spent 2 months in Israel recently, but I think that you could really elaborate on something that has to do with I would call it, because you've mentioned there was no constitution on independent, that, people are in a way confused, not only here, I also experienced that in Germany, about how is it possible that the state of Israel don't have a constitution, but they have what you call a declaration of independence for the Jewish state, and so to say the Zionist idea that found the right place for us based on history and to live in peace after a struggle of thousands of years. And what I'd like to ask you is, how do you see, what's your point of view about one of the items that I wanted to ask you, but you already answered, about the evacuation of the Israeli residents from north of Israel, let's say from Tiberias to north, and also around the Gaza area. And how do you, I would say, what's your vision about returning and vibrating the regions again, when you hear that many Israelis are in a way, planning not to return anymore due to the thoughts of, say, fear or disconfidence.
Okay. Many questions.
I'd say just to elaborate on this amazing
no, so
where, no, I mean it's all about, you know, the people. We say fallen of some people are saying, not only we, many, that there is in a way a very hard, I would call it challenge here now to deal with the idea of going to live on the borders and protect the state of Israel. Where are they now? They are all in Tel Aviv, in hotels or in Tiberias.
No, not all, but
the economy, not all, but you know, some 100,000 at least. So what are we doing next?
Yeah. So first of all, about the lack of constitution, I mentioned it was for political reasons, the pressure, semi-pressure of the Orthodox parties at the establishment of Israel in 1948. The Declaration of Independence was prepared just for the May 15th, 1948, when the state was declared. It was when the last British soldier left Israel, and the independence was declared in Tel Aviv on May 15th, still during the Independence War. But that was a declaration that was prepared by all parties. Everybody signed on the Declaration of Independence. It was principles on which Israel is established. But then many suggested to write a constitution, and then, as I told you, it was a pressure of the religious parties to say, we have the Bible, we don't need man-made constitution. And that was a mistake. It was really mistaken judgment, like the mistake of Ben-Gurion, allowing the ultra-Orthodox not to serve, because he was sure that only about 400 people will be studying, and not 50,000, 100,000. You have today more than 100,000 people studying in yeshiva, supported by the government, because of the political power. They got a lot of money to support the students who are not working, sometimes having families. So not only they don't contribute equally, they get much more than the equal share in all kinds of social benefits from the government. But that's one topic.
Yeah.
About the settlements, slowly but surely, they are now all day long, they are talking about plans for the northern part. Probably there is a sort of like an agreement, understanding of agreement between Israel, United States, and the official government of Lebanon. The only party that didn't accept it yet is the Hezbollah. You see, Hezbollah is a country within a country.
Yeah.
And they are stronger than the hosting country of Lebanon. Lebanon is a government. Lebanon has Christians, they have Sunnis, but the Shiites, which are minority, were able, with the money from Iran and the support of Iran, to become very strong military force, one of the strongest in the world, and to impose a will on the Lebanese government. But there is an agreement already to stop the war in Lebanon. And there is now pressure on the Hezbollah to accept it as well. And once it's done, and the Hezbollah is going beyond the Litani, and Israel has some rights to intervene if they go back south of the Litani River, people will start to coming back. Now, usually the kibbutzim, moshavim, the agricultural settlements are much stronger as a sort of like social point of view. And many of them, and that's also true for many of the kibbutzim around the Gaza Strip, there are about 30 kibbutzim. Some of them were very strong, and they were like a community, very strong community. And they have already sort of preparing to go back to start teaching again to renew the schools which were relocated. And slowly but surely, they're starting to also rebuild some of the destroyed houses, those that were burned out. And new population, I'm pretty sure, will come also for ideological reasons. So it will take 10 years to renew it, but it will be. The Hamas is not military force anymore. We hardly have any missiles from Gaza. Most of them were completely destroyed. Yes, the Hamas is not a military. It's not like the Hezbollah. The Hamas is an educational system, religious system. It's much more, as 2 million people living in Gaza, you kill one, 2 will join the new Hamas military force. So the idea is how to co-live. I don't think there will be peace treaty with the Hamas, but there will be some military steps so people can come back to the settlements around Gaza. Because Gaza has to be rebuilt. It's almost fully destroyed.
Yeah, it's good.
If you look, only for Australians to understand, the tunnel system in Gaza Strip is more than the metro, the underground system in New York, in Manhattan.
Yeah.
If you take all the subway in the subway system in New York, which is very vast and huge, Brooklyn, Queens, Manhattan, they had more and better tunnels than in Manhattan. That's quite amazing. Also in Lebanon, the same story.
We've hearing, Danny. We've heard many of the stories from people who've discovered the tunnel, so that's good. I think time-wise, if you do the next couple of slides, because I think those slides are important, and then we can have a Q&A for a bit, if that's okay with you. And the rest of, you've got a whole presentation there, so I'm happy I've got a copy of it, so I can send it out to those who would like to have it as well.
You can receive it, and if you have questions, you can relay them to me, no problem. Yeah,
that's good.
So now, still, where we stand. We still have demonstration every Saturday. Now it's not only against the judicial reforms, but it's also to release the captives, those that were kidnapped. Still, we have 101 that are in Lebanon. Probably more than 50% bodies are dead, but still some are alive under terrible conditions. Already for 400, today is the 400 days in captivity since October 7th. And also some of the demonstrations are against releasing the ultra-Orthodox from our army service. It's continuing. And there's a lot of turmoil about the decisions, including firing the Minister of Defense. Last week, Gallant was fired probably because he opposed releasing all the ultra-Orthodox. It was just sending to 7,000 of them a call to come to the military for the initial interview, etc. So that was the reason why Bibi fired him, because he was sort of obstacle and threatening the survival of Bibi politically, because they were threatening to quit the coalition. Okay, the economy is still functioning better than expected. The demand for housing is very strong. Prices are increasing. I think you have also part of the world trend that demand for offices is declining. We have probably a oversupply of offices. If you have been to Tel Aviv recently, to some of the cities around Tel Aviv, you saw the high rises, new office buildings, phenomenal. but the demand is declining also after COVID, like in the United States, in many other places. People are working from home, and the demand for offices is going down. But for housing, it's up. And surprisingly enough, people were sure that prices will decline, but they're not. Now, Eitan, to some extent, opposite to what you said, some of the housing is being purchased from Jews from other parts of the world. Still, they feel that it may be safer to live in Tel Aviv than in Amsterdam, surprisingly enough. So, it's mainly local demand, but also demand from Jews in different parts of the world, which find it that they want to have safety home. It's true. You have also many Israelis buying apartments in Cyprus, in Greece. They are very cheap, relatively cheap to the prices in Israel, so they can have also a safety home away, but it's a trend, but it doesn't affect the economy. Our foreign reserves, by the way, are very significant. Yeah.
Danny, the idea of Israeli government allocating funds now for those companies, especially in the south and the north, do you know what kind of is it enough as a medicine to revive those companies?
Never. The government usually give great promises to support companies, to support the farmers, but usually it's very delayed because they have to assess it. They have to send assessors to find what is the damage, because they're afraid, the government is always afraid that they may be sort of that people will cheat them. That's the starting point, that everybody will cheat them. So yes, they promise, but then they have to assess it. They don't have enough people to do the job. So everything's delayed. So a farmer that lost whatever he had in the field because of fire from missiles, it's not a blank check that he declares, I lost $100,000, and tomorrow he will get a check for $100,000.
Yeah.
He says, I have $1,000, and it will take half a year for somebody to come to fill some forms, to have the whole process, and then maybe they don't have the budget now available. They don't believe. They just were interviewing some farmers, and they said, we don't believe that we'll get fully compensated very soon. So there are many difficulties, and many small businesses out of business, went into bankruptcy. Also, many independent people that are on reserve duty.
Yeah.
They lose their businesses. And it's sort of paradoxically, only to understand some of the issues with the government promises, the social security system in Israel is providing you, when you go to the military, they provide you support, which is based on your salary and on your income. So if you made $20,000 per month, you'll get more than somebody that made only $10,000. It will be partial. You're not going to be fully compensated, but they will compensate you based on what you did. Now, the independent workers that are on reserve duty couldn't make money. They lost business, they lost money. So the Social Security is giving them support based on the new income, not on what they lost opportunity. Yeah. So they lost twice. They lost twice because they couldn't work, and they lost clients, and they lost income, and then they get much less support. And actually, many of them that lost already money in 23 are now being asked by the Social Security system to return money. So the wives at home are getting forms from the tax authority, from the Social Security, to return 100,000 shekels, 200,000 shekels, because they were sort of overpaid. So that double hit, but that's okay. So let me go to finish.
One more, and we'll finish up.
Yeah. So amazingly enough, the stock market is up 25% from the beginning of the year. Inflation rate is 3.6, which is not very high compared to other places, but other places, including the United States, the trend is decline, and it's not expected to decline in Israel because of the huge government deficit. So the huge government deficit is not going to be filled by, some will be by new taxes, but the minister of the treasury is very incompetent. He's ideological, he's coming from the far right wing, from the settlers. He doesn't have coherent plan. Only today is going to show what is the plans for the budget for 25, very late, very late, because they have to approve it very soon, within a month. And there's a lot of political money still built in the budget that they don't want to cut, against all advice. As a result, the rating of Israel, which was very good, was AA, and should have been even better, AA+, is declining. Moody's, S&P, Fitch, they all downgraded Israel, and S&P for the third time just declined the rating of Israel from A+ to A, despite the fact that we have more than $200 billion in foreign reserves. The foreign reserves are still very strong. Buying homes away from Israel still, or buying shares on S&P 500, it didn't affect much the foreign reserves of Israel. But the risk spreads of Israel jumped to 165, which is very high for Israel over the last 20 years, and it was 60 by October 2nd, 23. Inflation is expected to be 3.8 for 2024. An interest rate of the Bank of Israel is 4.5, is expected to stay at this relatively high level, and maybe even to go up if inflationary pressure will go up. Inflationary pressure may go up because of printing money. To cover the deficit, if you don't do the fiscal steps, you need to print money. And the major source of uncertainty in Israel today is that there are no plans for a day later. What will happen the day after? What will happen when we finish fighting in Gaza, when we finish fighting in Lebanon, which we hope will happen soon? There's no plan. What are we going to do with Gaza? Who is going to control Gaza? Are we going to police Gaza to take care of sewage and education system? It will cost us in lives, it will cost us in money, but who else can do it? We don't want the Hamas to do it. So which force will do it? Saudi Arabia and the Emirates, they don't want to do it without the consent of the people of Gaza. So it's a big mess. In Lebanon, it's less so if the government, legal government of Lebanon, will take control, which is part of the agreement. But as far as Gaza, also to some extent the West Bank, it's still a mess. No clear plan of the government. The high-tech industry, the big question is, can we still be called the startup nations? We see major reduction in investments in all stages, round pre-seed, seed, etc. I'll show you in a minute some data. Some industries are more affected than others. Still, we have quite inflow of funds from abroad for the cyber and AI-based industries. But some of the fields like food tech, agriculture, medical instrumentation, we see less. And the government is trying to compensate for that, but it's not sufficient. So only to show you the data, it spiked in 21 after the COVID. It was an enormous spike in investments, decline to normal levels in 22, but we see major decline, which coincided, as I said, to be fair, with the global trends. But in the United States, Europe, it's going up again. In Israel, we don't see yet. You see it here on a quarterly basis. So you see in more detail, and you can search at home to see the numbers here, the number of startups, the amount of money invested, also the median and mean investments in, and you can see the trend is that over the last 2 years, since the judicial system, but also coinciding with the world trends, we see a decline, steady decline in investments, which is going to affect the Israel economy in the long run. Okay, so deficit in the budget will be 8% which is very high. We had less than 2% over the last 2 years, 3 years, but it will go up to 8%. We don't know what it will be for 25, probably very high. A budget for 25 has not been approved yet. The burden of not recruiting the ultra-Orthodox is quite substantial. The Treasury estimates that every 1,000 of ultra-Orthodox ultra-Orthodox recruited will save about 1.3 billion shekels per year. So there's also a price tag to not recruiting the ultra-Orthodox, which is a major issue now, sort of overhanging the Israeli politics as well as the economy. I think that I'll stop here.
Yeah,
you can
thanks,
read
Danny.
And ask me questions if you have.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Danny. You can stop sharing now. That's wonderful. And as I said, I'll send people a copy of your PowerPoint who are interested. So that'd be great. Wonderful information. You've given us some prayer points as well, and I'll just summarise. The judicial system is still, a debating point, etc., between peoples. Obviously, the points you've made about the ultra-Orthodox, I would agree with, but we'll leave it. But it's certainly a prayer point to be thought of. And what's going to happen with Gaza after the day after is the big prayer point that we're all, we don't have answers for, but we will pray about them. So it's just wonderful to have your input once again. As you always are, you're on the point. You bring up good points for us to consider and leave for some of us who will continue to go on and pray after you leave us this afternoon on these points. And we'll catch you in Melbourne.
You should invest in joint ventures between Israel and Australia in startups. I try to promote it. I think it's essential for Australia, not only for Israel. Don't depend on mining only. Remember, that's what I said, Australians again and again, and some didn't like it. But you need to develop your own startups, and you have huge infrastructure which is unexploited.
Yeah, we agree with you. Lots of opportunities yet to come.
One thing, John, that I would sort of conclude on my side is that I think that the campaign of quote-unquote listen to, the quote-unquote campaign listen to the experts, listen to the experts from Israel, of course, from Australia, but also listen, and also internally in Israel, listen. We have to listen to each other. Without listening to each other, without stopping, interrupting each other in the middle of talking, we wouldn't make any progress. And I think this is the item for me today. Listen to the experts. And we are trying our best, John and myself, to really bring you, friends, really the best if we can from Israel and Australia. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you. On that note, we'll finish the recording. Yeah, Hillary's got a question, but I'm just going to finish the recording and we can go offline.